Welcome, everyone. If you are just joining us, thank you so much for joining us at the Hudson River Watershed Alliance's Breakfast Lecture Series. If you haven't already, go ahead and open up your chat box. And if you can type in your name, affiliation, where you're zooming in from today, it'll give us a good sense of who's joining us today in our Zoom room. Thanks, everyone, for taking the time out of your Thursday morning to be here. My name is Emily Vale. I'm the Executive Director of the Hudson River Watershed Alliance. And this whole season, this whole year, we've had monthly breakfast lecture series that have focused on particular grant opportunities and technical assistance opportunities. So each one has featured a state program along with a local case study. And we have compiled all of those on our website and in our YouTube channel. This is the final one of these in our season, but the timing couldn't be better because, of course, the consolidated funding application and many other grant programs are currently open right now. So we wanted to draw your attention to this webpage and our YouTube channel, which we'll be sending out to everyone as a resource library for many of the grants that are currently open. So if you'd like to learn more from the state programs or from case studies, excellent reference library for those types of projects. So we want to thank the Hudson River Estuary Program and WQIP for their support of this season, including today's program. So a couple of logistics before we just go ahead and get started. Thanks to everyone who's writing in the chat and letting us know who's in the Zoom room with us today, your name, affiliation, where you're zooming in from. It really helps us get a sense of who's in community with us this morning in our virtual space. And then as you have questions during the two presentations, please make sure to put them in the Q&A box. We will take questions at the end after both Kristin and Bob present. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Kristin Martinez, the Environmental Program Specialist at the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, to present on the Water Quality Improvement Program Land Acquisition for Source Water Grant Opportunity.
Thank you, Emily. I will share my screen now so folks can see that. All right. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to learn about this funding source. This is the Land Acquisition for Source Water Protection funding source through WQIP, which is part of the consolidated funding application. I oversee that funding source, so if folks have any questions, please feel free to reach out. But I will do a quick overview of this program and provide you some useful resources as we go through our presentation. But first, I really quick just wanted to start on just some basics of what source water protection is. I know quite a few of us probably fill up our reusable water bottles, glass cup, and maybe perhaps don't think about where our water comes from. And I don't mean the treatment plant, but even before that, the lake a few miles away or our sole source aquifers deep below the ground. So the protection of these drinking water sources, our rivers, springs, aquifers can include a variety of actions and activities aimed at safeguarding, maintaining, or improving the quality and or quantity of sources of drinking water and their contributing areas. So some examples of source water protection can include repairing buffer restoration, which could reduce runoff pollution, stream bank stabilization to reduce sedimentation, best management practices for forestry or agricultural activities, and of course, land acquisition through outright purchase of land or conservation easements. So protecting source water. Why do we do this? Why is this important? Acquiring land, for example, can prevent potential contaminants from entering the source water, thereby preventing potential contamination. Acquiring the land and adding a riparian buffer, for example, could act as a filter for pollutants that otherwise may enter the source, say from stormwater runoff. And since potential contaminant sources are being prevented and even filtered out with these buffers, the community could prevent unnecessary treatment costs. So how can you protect source water? Land acquisition is a great step to protecting source water. This could include, conservation easements with a willing landowner or even outright purchases. Now, the last one on here isn't necessarily land acquisition, but riparian buffer restoration. So, planting native trees or shrubs adjacent to a water body could also be a great action for source water protection. So what resources are available to do this? The Water Quality Improvement Project Program, also known as WQIP, is a competitive statewide reimbursement grant program. This provides funding for projects that directly improve water quality or aquatic habitat or protect a drinking water source. The program overview for this round, which we're on round 19 right now, is on DEC's website, and you can find that by searching on WQIP. WQIP offers funding for a number of project types, and this includes land acquisition for source water protection. So now, what exactly does the land acquisition project type cover? The land acquisition is going to include or be available for acquisition or conservation easements that protect sources of public drinking water. So this can include protecting a groundwater source, so again, a wellhead, or the land around a river or stream that's going to protect a surface water source or that intake. This funding is flexible. It's for the outright purchase of property as well as the purchase of conservation easements. And in fact, about half of our applications that we have received today are a mix of both outright and easement purchases. So you can include a combination of those. In addition to land acquisition, this program does also cover the costs for work associated with riparian buffer establishment or improvement, groundwater recharge area restoration through native plantings, and transactional costs associated with acquiring that parcel. There have been 5 rounds funded so far, totaling 51 projects and awarding more than $65 million. And again, for more information on this program, you can go to DEC's website and search on WQIP. So really quick, just wanted to cover some of the expected benefits of this program. Source water protection is probably the first thing that comes to mind, but awardees could also see additional benefits, which could include open space land conservation, climate change mitigation, wildlife habitat, flood risk reduction, and air quality. So funding, what does this round's funding look like? Applicants this year can request a maximum grant amount of $5 million. It does have a low local match component of 25%. I think folks are probably familiar with this, that WQIP is part of the Consolidated Funding Application, also known as the CFA. To apply, please be sure to visit the WQIP webpage, or you can search on CFA in a browser. The deadline to apply this year is July 28th by 4 p.m. Okay, so who's eligible to apply? Municipalities, not-for-profits such as land trust, and soil and water conservation districts are eligible to apply for land acquisition funding. There may only be one applicant, so that means joint applications are not accepted. However, we have seen municipalities work with land trust and vice versa, with one of them being listed as a subcontractor in the application. The land trust and municipality partnerships are able to bring their own set of talents and resources to the table to protect the source of public drinking water. And this, that type of partnership we have found is not only good at completing the application, but also project management when awarded. So under the land acquisition project type of WQIP, there are 2 ways to apply to that project type. The first is as a project. Projects are to purchase conservation easements and/or outright purchases of land for the purpose of protecting one or more active drinking water supplies. So again, your streams, lakes, rivers, and reservoirs, or your groundwater wellheads. With projects, your land parcels must be specifically identified at the time of application to be considered for funding under the project category. And projects are expected to acquire all parcels identified in the application unless unusual circumstances arise. The other way you could apply is as a program. So like projects, programs are also to purchase conservation easements and/or outright purchases of land, but you don't have to have all of your parcels identified at the time that you submit your application. So instead, you could identify the source water and the area contributing water to that source water that you would like to protect. So there's a lot of flexibility with this option. For some communities, you may have already done some water quality related planning. So thinking to some watershed plans, or perhaps you participated in a drinking water source protection program plan. You could then apply to purchase or acquire easements of land within that, that priority area that's identified in those plans. So now that you've identified how you want to apply, probably asking, how am I scored? So all applications are reviewed using the scoring rubrics made available in the WQIP program overview for round 19. Projects and programs have the same scoring criteria categories, but how they receive points between these categories may be slightly different. I did want to highlight for a few folks that perhaps applied in the past, there are a few new scoring categories this year. Those include a riparian buffer category, an environmental justice and disadvantaged community category, climate resilience, and flood resilience. And then just quickly to show you folks how these two applying as a project or program, that scoring rubric differs, is under a project, those there's a performance measure category, and those points are broken up by the proximity of that parcel to the water supply, or if it's included in some sort of watershed or drinking water source protection plan. Under a program, because you don't necessarily have your parcels identified at the time that you apply, it focuses on the area the applicant is looking to protect. So what cost should you include if you're considering applying? As mentioned earlier, the cost of the land or easement is not the only eligible project cost for this funding source. Eligible project costs can include appraisals, surveys, baseline documentation report, your title, riparian buffer work, stewardship funds, staff time to implement the project, and much more. Please be sure to review the land acquisition portion of the program overview, which goes into much more detail on these eligible project costs. So you heard me mention match before. It is 25% for this project type. So where can your match come from? The first one you're probably familiar with, it's cash, which is pretty common with a lot of grants. The one thing I wanted to highlight here is for this program, cash could consist of donated land value. And so what I mean by that is, say you are working with a landowner and you have completed the appraisal report for that property and it comes in at $300,000. That appraisal report is submitted to us as part of this grant. And if it's reviewed and accepted by DEC, but the landowner is willing to sell you the property at $250,000, that difference of $50,000 could go towards the match for this program. Another source of match can come from in-kind services. So as long as they are eligible and related to implementing the grant program. So think staff time or equipment used to perhaps build the riparian buffer. And then lastly on here, you can also, the match can also come from federal funding sources. So quite a few options there. For those that may be repeat applicants or looked at the previous rounds, I did want to highlight a few changes. The first one is the groundwater recharge area. So that is relatively new. And what this allows is, if a parcel that is intended to protect a wellhead overlays a designated groundwater recharge area, it may be revegetated using native plantings. The second one I wanted to highlight is the advance payment option. So for this program, it's typically a reimbursement grant program, meaning folks have to pay for the cost up front and then they come in for reimbursement after they've received all of our approvals. For the land acquisition project type, awardees can actually request two advance payments, first known as a transactional advance and the second as a purchase advance. And what these do is they provide the funds needed to complete the land acquisition research, so meaning the appraisals, surveys, things like that, ahead of time prior to closing. And then that purchase advance is going to provide you the actual funds to close on that parcel ahead of time as well. And then the third change is the riparian buffer widths. So depending on where your parcel lies in relation to that public water supply, you can have varying buffer widths on that property. So please look at that program overview, which has much more detail on each of these changes. So what is required to apply? There are, as always, a few required attachments for these applications. For the land acquisition project type, I wanted to highlight three. The first is a budget summary. The next is a monitoring and enforcement protocol, and then the third is MATS. The Round 19 program overview provides more detail on each of these required attachments, and we also have additional resources available on the WQIP program webpage. All right, so application support and tips. If you are new to perhaps the consolidated funding application, if you go to their main page, you will find that they have a consolidated funding application manual, which is a step-by-step guide for how to fill out an application. Also, when you are completing the application through the CFA, certain questions will have a helpful hint, so you can expand on those and definitely review that information when completing those questions. The other thing I wanted to highlight is DEC also recently completed a webinar for the overall WQIP grant program, but they included quite a few useful tips when applying. A recording of that webinar can be found on the DEC WQIP website right at the top. So I would recommend you view this recording as well to learn some of those useful tips. I did note a few that I wanted to cover here for you folks today. The first is we recommend starting early to have plenty of time to complete an application. As a reminder, the deadline to apply for this round of funding is July 28th by 4 p.m. The second is to be sure to review the land acquisition section of that program overview thoroughly to understand the program requirements and application materials. The program overview is also going to include information if you are awarded, so you can get a sense of what that looks like. And then the third thing we wanted to note is the program overview also includes the scoring rubrics for this project type, and those are the same scoring rubrics that folks will review once reviewing submitted applications. So go ahead and self-score your project just to see how it might do. Okay, so I quickly just wanted to cover what could an application look like if it's awarded, so post-award requirements. There are a few things that we do require to be submitted and reviewed before closing typically. And again, all of this is covered in our program overview. So that's going to include things like the appraisals for the property, survey, title, conservation easement, if that's the type of acquisition you would like to do, and the rest that you see on this slide. Some of these items may only be required depending on the project you are submitting or whether you are a municipality or a not-for-profit applying. So one example is a municipality will need to complete a water withdrawal permit modification. So the last item here on the slide, which we have more information on what that entails in that program overview document, whereas a land trust would not need to complete that step. And to help with again, what that looks like post-award, DEC did develop the WQIP Land Acquisition Toolkit. This is basically a web page that includes all of our program standards and guidelines for awardees to use. So that's going to include resources on what the appraisal should include, survey, a conservation easement, and more. So if you're interested on what if you're curious about submitting an application, but just want to know what resources are available to you if you are awarded, please feel free to look at this webpage. And then I did want to mention one source water protection resource that folks may find useful. Recently, a new tool developed between New York State DEC Division of Water and the Long Island Sound Study was released. It's called the Funding Finder. And this was designed to simplify the process of finding grant opportunities. So it enables grant seekers to filter opportunities based on criteria that meets their specific needs. It encompasses a wide variety of federal, state, and local funding and will be updated periodically. So DEC grants featured in this tool include water protection, wildlife protection, land and forest protection, climate change, and environmental justice grants. And if folks would like to dig through this tool, please feel free to search on our DEC webpage using the Funding Finder title. And because I know I went through quite a bit, I did want to mention a few of the links that you may find helpful. And the first is a WQIP link, and this page includes how to apply, the Round 19 program overview, resources available to aid with application attachments, and much more. And again, we definitely encourage folks to thoroughly review all of these materials available before submitting an application. The second is a link to the consolidated funding application, which, as a reminder, that deadline to apply is 4 p.m. on July 28th. The third is a link to the land acquisition toolkit, and that's what has the resources to aid with land acquisition document development and also contract development once awarded. Fourth, here we have our Making Waves e-newsletter. So that's if you would like to receive program announcements, perhaps about this funding source or just other water-related topics. And then the last is our Drinking Water Source Protection Program e-newsletter. So that's going to include information on the Drinking Water Source Protection Program, which I believe was included in this breakfast series last month. So you can go ahead and check out that webinar if you want more information. But this e-newsletter also includes funding, which was actually our main newsletter, and any other source water related topics. And I just want to thank everyone for their time today. Here's my contact information if folks would like to reach out about any questions for this funding source. And with that, I will pause on this slide, which is your next presenter, who applied to the WQIP land acquisition program in our first round of funding.
Great. Thank you so much, Kristin, for that overview of the WQIP funding for source water protection and land acquisition. That's a mouthful. Thanks so much for breaking it down and going through some of the details of the available funding that's out now. I'm going to hand it over next to Bob Davis, the Executive Director of the Winnakee Land Trust, to talk about a project that they implemented with funding from this program.
Okay. Now, presuming that I can actually find my presentation. Nope, that's not it. Where's the PowerPoint? We just went through this. Okay. I apologize for this. It's taking a little longer to find. Should have practiced once more. Okay, I think I've got it now. How are we doing?
Looks great.
All right, we're finally in business. And I just realized that I had, since Kristin had included a map of the project area, I hadn't included one in this presentation. We may, at the end, want to bounce back to Kristin's presentation and look at that last slide. But let me begin by giving an overview of just who Winnakee is. You know, we're a small land trust in northwestern Dutchess County. We've been around for about almost 35 years now. The organization started with the intention of protecting open space and the character of the community within about a 6-town area within northwestern Dutchess County. More recently, you know, we've recognized that the threats to our open space and critical habitats is not just limited to development. While development is a good start, conservation easements are terrific tools. It's not the only tool that we need. There are many of the threats to our lands today can't read conservation easement restrictions, and actual fee title ownership and the ability to actively steward those properties is becoming very important. And that's one of the reasons we were interested in the WQIP program. We recently launched a campaign we call Forever Forests in order to specifically protect forest lands and, you know, and all of the ecosystem services that they provide. And this fit in perfectly with the WQIP program. In fact, the basis for this is the fact that, you know, water is essential for life and forests are essential for water. You know, so regardless of where you live, there's a very good chance that the water that you're drinking depended upon a forest somewhere in order to collect, clean, and deliver it to you. And for that reason, we are quite interested in protecting forests that also protect source water. And we do, again, we have a fee ownership model. We allow, we prefer active stewardship. Their forests are indeed changing in our area. They're in many cases, they're not changing for the better. And without some active assistance, we may not like what we end up with 100 years from now. WQIP provided an affordable way to protect these properties, and it also helped us meet our Connecting Communities mission. So in the case of the Sawkill Protection Project, which is what Kristin had the slide Kristin had shown earlier, development of about a 335 acre area was probably the most immediate threat to the source water. The Sawkill, in fact, is the primary source of drinking water to Bard College. They do use the surface water, and it does serve about 1,400 people. The property, the 335 acres, not only protected the immediate surface water, but also two key wellheads that provided drinking water to another 4,300 residents within the community in two separate community water systems. And again, going even beyond water protection, we achieve habitat protection. We know that on the within that property there are two species of greatest conservation need. It does provide additional flood control and protecting the wetlands, and of course storing carbon in a rapidly changing climate. One other really interesting aspect of this is that we were able to actually create, or we're in the process of creating, a trail network that will connect the Bard College campus to the village of Red Hook. So the unique piece of this project was that, the Red Hook itself has a community preservation fund, and that fund is largely funded by real estate transfer taxes, although it's not limited to that. They can use anything they want to fund that. And Red Hook was willing and able to provide the match for this project. So WQIP program provided about 75% of what we needed, and the village and the town of Red Hook, through the Community Preservation Fund, was able to purchase an easement from us across the property for public access within this narrow trail corridor. So this is a portion of the two sections that we're currently working on, the southern and northern piece. This will eventually, these two will be connected to one another and then extend further on toward Bard College. But the village, or excuse me, the town was interested in providing public access across the area, and certainly connecting the village to the community, and was willing to acquire that easement in order to do so. And we will be building this trail system out over the next probably 4 or 5 years. Actually, and just to put a word in for DEC, they were tremendously helpful in assisting us to come up with a design that was acceptable under the parameters of the WQIP program. And we're really, even when they didn't have the answers to the questions themselves, maybe within Division of Water, they were quite happy to bring in Division of Lands and Forests, real property, whoever needed to be brought in, and really, really rapidly and easily resolve questions and issues putting this together. It was a real, you probably won't believe it, but it was a real joy to work with these folks. They were very helpful. So we've got 1.6 miles of trail connecting the village to Bard, and we will eventually connect with the Empire State Trail. So I believe has been mentioned, we've been working with, Sawkill watershed community that's been monitoring water quality along the Sawkill with Bard College itself and with the Red Hook Trails group. We have a couple of ongoing projects with respect to amphibian and eel monitoring. And then again, Sawkill Watershed Community has been doing the water quality monitoring program all along the Sawkill. It is our intention to acquire additional properties along the Sawkill, and we will be using the WQIP program to do that. In fact, I mentioned this morning that before we became live, that Winnakee will be submitting 2 more applications for 2 additional projects in the current round, one along the Sawkill, one along another. And we do, where necessary, we will be improving riparian buffers and providing a number of on-site educational programs. So what I thought I might mention, though, is that as part of this project, we learned, this initial round, we learned a great many lessons in working with the program. One of which had to do with the nature of the property that we had acquired in Red Hook, which was much more of a suburban setting than anything else. Which was something that was really quite unique for me, was that, acquiring a property of only about 335 acres, but which had 95 neighbors, residential neighbors. If you can avoid it, try to. We did have quite a bit of, boundary line encroachment resolution that we had to resolve before we could close. There's quite a bit of stewardship required. While we were able to raise the match, from the local community, we probably should have raised more initially for stewardship, and we're currently doing that. Because every single hazard tree on one side of that, on our side of the boundary is likely, has a, at least some chance over the next 100 years of actually falling and causing damage to private residences that are built very close to the Sawkill. So we needed, we need to put into place a program to mitigate that. We need to address, through raising additional stewardship dollars, the ability to manage that part of the program. What else am I missing here? Yeah, that's really, I think those were two of the largest issues. And ultimately, though, we've been extremely happy with the program. We think we've been able to to really protect an important area within both the village and the town of Red Hook. It's going to ensure the protection of source water for both Bard College as well as much of the village of Red Hook well into the future, and provide a number, a wide variety of ecosystem services as we go forward in time. And I would be happy to address any questions anyone has regarding our project.
Great. Thank you so much, Bob, for walking us through this talk. I think that this example from Winnakee is really such a great one because it combines so many partnerships and goals, and looking at public access and the trail network, the drinking water protection, the habitat and flooding benefits. It, I think, is a great example of all of the mutual benefits that you can get through some of these kinds of programs. So so we're going to open up for Q&A. So if you have questions for either Bob or Kristin, make sure you put them in the Q&A box. And so we've got one here already, which is something that's probably top of mind for many of us, most of us right now, which is around air quality. So right now we're experiencing really poor and potentially hazardous air quality due to wildfires in Canada and a lot of the smoke that's been coming down into the Hudson Valley. How does air quality apply to drinking water protection? Is there a connection here with the particulate matter in the air and what might be at risk for water quality?
I think the simple answer to that one is that, again, as I mentioned earlier, forests are essential for, to water. Forests themselves are going to remove particulate matter from the air and help to clean that along the way. So to the extent that you're preserving forested areas, you're doing everything you can to remove the particulate matter.
That's great. Thank you. Kristin, anything you want to add?
Yeah, agree. And if the only other thing I will add is this program, not only do you, let's just say, have to find a parcel that is forested, it also provides funds where, let's just say there's some
Right.
clear cutting up to the stream to then establish a riparian buffer, which is, the planting of those trees and such, which is, just like Bob just said, it's going to help with the absorption of pollution, perhaps in that air quality. So just another benefit.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's an important reminder for all of us. I know I've seen a lot of people talking about, climate change made visible, which absolutely it is. And I think it also really speaks to the interconnections of our airshed and our watershed. Any airborne materials are going to hit rain and fall out into our watersheds. And so there is this really specific air water connection as well. That's really important. So thanks for that answer. In terms of the trails that are planned for the Winnakee parcel, are those for walking? Are those for biking? Are they multi-use? What is the plan for those?
Yeah, the plan is multi-use, but the uses will be restricted to areas where they're suited to that use. So walking will be permitted along the whole, the whole system. Biking may be restricted to it does cross some wetland areas, and we really don't want to run the biking part of the trail through that. But we do have a loop planned that would be of value, of interest to folks that wish to bike out there.
Great, thank you. I have a question about the Winnakee project too. So I'm wondering, you mentioned several of these different partnerships with Bard College and Sauk Hill Watershed Community and the town and village of Red Hook, among others. And I'm wondering how the project got started and how you were able to build some of these community partnerships. Did the idea come from, one of these entities and you made connections with these? Was this sort of a shared vision? How did this project come about from sort of concept into that application?
Well, actually, I think it began with the previous executive director who retired about 4 years ago. And he worked, I think he had the idea, and he began working with the town supervisor in Red Hook and with the Red Hook Trails group, and collectively they came up with this, project idea. And Greg went ahead and put in an application, convinced the board that this was a good project for everyone, and we should move forward with it. And the rest is history.
That's great. Thank you. Kristin, I'm wondering, in your experience too, working on these projects across the state, if there's any themes that you've seen across different types of project areas, or any, trends as we're thinking about climate change and source water planning and all of these other, analogous program areas. If you have any sort of like big picture reflections on how the WQIP source water protection program land acquisition fits into some of these other pieces.
Yeah, great question. I think probably the largest that we hear or see in applications, which I think would be no surprise, is climate change. We have folks that will acquire parcels, just like this Winnakee Land Trust example, that is forested. You're keeping it forested, so it could help with any, we have if there's more intense stormwater, things like that, that runoff now has to come across the land, and instead of it being developed, it can now be absorbed or slowed down from that area. So climate change, I would say, is something that we see pretty consistent among our applications, and it's now part of the scoring rubric. So definitely go in and check that part of the program overview there. I think the other one is open space land conservation. So, it's not thinking about it from a drinking water's perspective, but just for the community is another big piece that we see. So again, looking at this Winnakee project, you folks are keeping this area for the community to enjoy and use instead of it being perhaps developed. So that's another way, open space land plan is in our scoring rubric. So we do, look at that piece of it because it does have a benefit there. What was it? Flood resilience is also in our new to our scoring rubric now. So I think we started to see these things in our applications, and they're now, so that we can start giving folks some scoring. It's encompassed in our scoring rubrics now. So public recreation is a big one. So a couple of ways we're getting all these other important topics into this program.
That's great. And for municipalities that go through this process, are they eligible for Climate Smart Communities certification points?
So I have to review the Climate Smart. I know that, which is another program that I work on. So I'm going to switch over to that a little bit. For the drinking water source protection program, if you complete a plan, which is to protect your source water, you can get points through the Climate Smart Community. I'd have to check on the land acquisition side of it, as I know they give you points for implementation projects. So if one of your implementation projects under that plan was land acquisition, I could see how you could get points there. I don't know if they have like a separate one for land acquisition. I'd have to look at that.
That's great. Thank you. I know many of our municipal partners are really active in climate smart communities. And so, queuing up all of these different project areas and getting points in all different ways. Obviously, the economic, social, environmental benefits of this project are numerous, but also, thinking about some of those additional opportunities to leverage some of those points as well. Let's see. Any other questions here? We've got a question here on how the Supreme Court's recent decision on what is considered a significant water source affects the Hudson River Watershed Alliance and our members. Not specific to today's discussion necessarily, but obviously a really important topic. So recent Supreme Court decision around Clean Water Act protections and wetlands and water courses. We're still unpacking exactly what this means for us in New York State, and how New York State wetland laws are protective and actually increasing in their protection. So we know that due to recent legislation that additional wetlands are going to be protected under New York State. So that's a really great positive thing for thinking about protecting water quality and flooding and all of the other habitat values and important aspects of wetland and stream protection. And so I think we're still trying to unpack exactly what this means for New York State, specifically thinking about some of the federal protections going away, but some of the New York State protections increasing. So stay tuned. We're going to be learning more about what this means, and hopefully we'll be able to share some more details soon. But yeah, thanks for that. It's really breaking news, very important aspect of how wetlands and streams are protected. Okay, are there any proposals to extend the Sauk Hill trails down towards Milan and New York State Route 199 or north into Tivoli Bays State Park in the future to connect to the town of Tivoli? So really local question about the Winnakee project in Red Hook.
I think the long-term answer to that is yeah, we will. We're working on, and again, one of the projects we're going to be applying for this summer will be another WQIP project protecting another mile of the Sauk Hill, and that will very likely include a very similar type of trails component, and that will move it up a bit more further towards Milan. I haven't found a project yet moving closer to Tivoli Bays, but I'm sure we'll find one somewhere.
That's great. Thank you. And I know the trail is also planned to connect to the Empire State Trail. that you had mentioned that, and another trail system, is that right?
Well, to Empire State Trail, and it will connect to, again, we can run it up further toward, further toward town of Milan, but it'll connect to Bard College and, everything at Montgomery Place, and I think one of their some of their new acquisitions as well. It just takes time, it takes a while to piece these things together.
That's great. And I think, you're speaking to the duration of the planning process too, that, this is 4+ years in the making to conceptualize and apply for the funding.
Absolutely.
Get that protection in place. And I think it's exciting too, that it's not only recreation, the trail opportunity, but also transportation, right? And thinking about the ability to get from, Bard College to other places, and having some safe routes for folks that are protected in more ways than one, several different layers of protection. So we've got a comment here about the more interconnections, the demand for bikes will be greater, that, these are huge assets, I think, to our transportation network. Any other questions from our audience here for our panelists today? I do have one more question, and I sort of hesitate to ask this, but I'll go for it. So I'm wondering, particularly with the water quality monitoring that the Sawkill Watershed Community and Bard Community Sciences Lab has been doing, how is the water quality of the Sawkill? How are the water supplies for the village of Red Hook that's pulling from these groundwater sources that are influenced by the Sawkill? I'm wondering if these are high quality sources where protection is playing a role, if there's some restoration need around pollutants of concern. If you could speak to that a little bit, Bob.
I can give you a little bit of that. I mean, the water quality classification of the Sawkill right now is B, but based on the monitoring that Sawkill Watershed Community has been doing, I believe they are going to actively pursue a reclassification as an A. So it's actually improving, and we hope to keep it that way.
That's great. And that Class A protection will also, provide for more local protections as well, and more state
Absolutely.
levels of review. So that's great to hear. That'll be a really exciting project. So if there are no more questions from our participants, I just want to thank Bob Davis, Winnakee Land Trust, Kristin Martinez, New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. The consolidated funding application is open. Numerous grant programs are available. Millions of dollars of funding is accessible right now to communities. So we want to make sure that you all have access to the information you need to apply for funding to implement these kinds of great projects in your community. So if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to Kristin or any of the other grant program folks that we've brought in over the past year. And thanks so much. We are going to be taking a summer break for our breakfast lecture series. We always take a break over the summer, but we will be back in September with more programming, and we look forward to seeing you then. So thanks so much, everyone, and have a great day.
Thanks, Emily.
Thank you.